Hi everyone and welcome to my channel. If it's your first time here, then please do go and have a look through all of my playlists at the variety of different videos that I make here on YouTube. But as many of you know, I make lots of real-time tutorials for my Patreon channel. And then once in a while, I try to make something extra special for you guys here on YouTube. Recently, I've been loving painting tiny garden birds, and this month I decided to squeeze in an extra little painting just for you guys. This will be a 3-part series totaling almost 4.5 hours, and I worked at a very relaxed pace on this little painting, and I chatted all the way through about my process. So come along and work with me, as this will be a great series to give you lots of soft pastel skills. And please do remember to hit subscribe here on YouTube and show me some support. I'm aware that not everyone can afford to subscribe on Patreon, even though it's from as little as €4 a month, and that is why I try to give some free content here on YouTube. So I hope that you will all enjoy this little series as my gift to you. So what I'm going to be showing you in this series is this lovely little Chaffinch painting. And here on screen now are the materials that you'll need to work along with me. You don't have to have exactly the same colours as me, but something close. And I'm working on the brown colour of pastel matte paper, and my painting is 8 by 10 inches. Again, if you want to work on a different paper or work to a different size, that is totally possible. And if you would like to access the photo reference in a high resolution, I will make it available via a link in the description. You don't have to sign up or anything. I'll make the image available for free. So I hope you enjoy this series. So I've got my line sketch on my pastel matte paper now. If you want to see more on how I do that, I've got other videos here on my channel to show you how I sketch, how I transfer my sketch onto pastel papers. All of that is already covered. So let's make a start on this little Chaffinch. The first thing, as always, that I'll make a start on is the background. So I'm just picking up a hard black pastel stick here because the first thing I want to do is just lightly sketch the main shapes. We've got a very out of focus bokeh background, as it's called in the photography world, and that's what I want to try and create here. So I want to keep it simple, but I want to bring in some of those lovely colours and the light that's coming from the bokeh background here. So I'm just giving myself a rough idea of where I'm gonna have this brighter corner here. Just shapes that I'm seeing within the background, but I'm looking at the overall shape. So I'm measuring across here how much darkness I want to have coming down through this and behind the bird, and it kind of curves back down towards the bottom. So we're going to get this kind of movement hopefully in the background where the dark comes down, goes behind the bird, so that all the lovely little bright highlights on the bird stand out. And then I'm going to include some of the green that I can see in this bottom corner. I'm going to include plenty of bits of green in the background because there's actually a lot of green on the front of the bird, so I really like all the reflected colours. Sometimes when I'm working on backgrounds, I don't like to change them too much because a lot of the time the colours in the background are what's affecting the colour of the main subject. So yes, you can take artistic license with things, but if you are putting a background in, make sure that you think about things like reflected colours, especially if you're changing a background. If I was changing the background of this perhaps to a completely blue sky, perhaps I wouldn't include some of the greens that I'm going to add on the bird a bit later. So you got to think about those reflected colours because light bounces off absolutely everything that it can reach. And if you really want your main subject, whatever it might be, if it's a people portrait or an animal portrait, if you want that subject to really look like they belong in the environment you've created for them, then a lot of that comes from the colours that you use and how you're noticing those background colours and how they affect the main subject. So quite often you're going to get a lot of colour bouncing all over the place. So I'm just using this black stick while I have it in my hand to kind of block in where I'm going to go pretty dark in the background here. It's not going to be black, of course, but I'm really just using this as a way to create a different tonal value, a bigger area blocked in like this, just to help me start to see the overall composition. So I don't want to spend too long on this background. Bokeh backgrounds can be quick, they can be extremely laborious as well. It really depends on how out of focus the camera was when it took the photo. So there are varying levels of complexity when it comes to painting bokeh backgrounds. This one I'm hoping I can keep it pretty simple, and I really wanted to share a little bird with you guys, but I always like to include backgrounds as well, so I'm just looking for those areas between the thin branches. And again, these areas aren't going to be black, I'm just blocking in a bit of a dark tonal value. So lots of little background gaps, delicate little areas to work. I've just painted a little sparrow in a hydrangea bush, and it was a lot more complicated, the background in that one. But there are some of those principles here with the nice crisp branches coming across the composition, and wanting to create that feeling of smooth background running seamlessly behind that. So that's kind of where my darks are going to go. But of course black is not going to be my darkest value all over the painting. So I'm going to pick up a Terry Ludwig pastel. It's one that I use in a lot of paintings these days. This is V100, and it's a lovely dark eggplant colour. I know that this is a lot of pastel artists, one of their favourite colours. And I can see why. I do make use of it quite a lot these days. It just gives me something that's a bit more interesting than pure black, while at the same time being incredibly dark. Because for me the key to, or one of the keys to painting realism, is in representing the full tonal value range that you can see. And part of that comes from the colours that you use, so choosing a range of dark tones right through to light tints. And then also with soft pastel, partly it comes from the materials that you're using as well. For example, on pastel mat you can get those really dark tones to layer up quite well, and therefore you can build a really dark bottom end to your tonal value scale. But if you've ever played around with some different pastel papers, you'll also know that sometimes you just can't get those darker colours. The paper just doesn't accept more layers, and no matter what you do, you can't get it to go darker. So just like with the black, actually, I'm coming back into some of what will be the darker areas in the background. So let's just smudge all of that into the paper. Make a nice mess at this stage. And you really do make a mess because these darker pigments really go for your fingertips as well. But the nice thing about soft pastel is it just washes off really easily. So just a little bit of soap and water and it washes right off. Unfortunately, I'm just as messy with oil paints, and that is not so easy to wash off, not so forgiving. So I love that I can make a good mess with soft pastel and that it cleans off, well, off most things quite easily. So I'm not worrying about losing some of the outlines a little bit. You can usually see those lines faintly through everything anyway. So the next colour that I can see looming out from the darkness here, some sense of green running through the background. So this is green 14 from Unison. Most of the pastels I'm using are Unison pastels, and then sometimes I'll just have a Terry Ludwig or some other special colour added in. But a lot of the codes I'll mention in this tutorial will be Unison colours. So you can see that I have actually removed one branch from the background just to simplify this bottom corner a little bit. So the idea with this type of background is you're not trying to do all of the effect in one or two layers of colour. For it to look extra convincing, it really takes a few layers, and you'll see what I mean while I'm building this up, hopefully. And I'm using all the pastel sticks now on their sides. No hard edges in this type of background, all really soft marks and lots of blending. So you'll see that each layer, when I blend, it really starts to fill the paper a little more, and it will start to go into a nice smooth texture in the background. So I'm not adding really thick layers of pastel, trying to leave myself lots of room on the paper to allow lots of these colours to shine through. So little circular motions for this type of background in my blending. So I just want to mark out where some of these circular shapes are coming to. And this is BV15. And even though this corner is pretty bright, I'm not coming in right away with those brighter colours. So you can see there the lovely smooth type of soft mark you can get when you use the soft pastel on its side. This will vary depending on the paper that you're using, because what you're really seeing there is the texture of the paper. And in some cases the texture of the paper is what I use then for the mark, but in this case with the bokeh background effect, that out of focus effect, I'm not letting that paper grain remain as part of the texture of my mark. I'm smoothing everything off. So even over some of the darker parts of the background, it sort of looks misty, like we're seeing some of this blue haze from the light areas just filter down and mix with the darkness of the background. So of course you don't have to follow the reference image exactly with a background like this. You can take a bit of artistic license. The things that I'm thinking about with a background like this are mainly how it's going to complement the main subject later on. And not just the main subject, but with these flowers, for example, I'll also want to make sure that I've put an area of background here that allows those flowers to stand out. So you can see on the right side of the flowers there's a lot of light hitting them, so they've got good bright highlights. So this area back here needs to be at least dark enough for them to stand out. And that's what I'm thinking about with every edge to what my main subject will be. How's that going to stand out from the background that I've created in that section? So I find these backgrounds pretty fun to do. Lots of smudging, just looking at the bigger shapes that I'm seeing looming out of the out of focus sections. And you can have a bit of fun with them. You can really play about with what colours you add in. So I'm just starting to lighten certain areas, but I will probably come back in with my darks again. And you can sort of push and pull a bit like that with soft pastel. So I'm back in with the dark Terry Ludwig. So it's really the focal point of the whole painting, I think, here on the little bird's face, and that beak just sticking out into that very dark area of background really makes the little bird stand out. So that's going to be a lot of my focus when I get to painting the bird, making it really pop out from the background. But I can think about that now while I'm creating the background, how it's going to help the effect later on. So as we start to get more layers on the paper, things start to blend more easily. So you don't really want a pastel paper that blends too easily in the first layers, because that means after one or two layers you're going to completely lose control of it and possibly not be able to add any more pigment. So I like a paper that takes a while to get going, takes a few layers on the paper before it wants to let me move the pigment around like this and start to blend things easily. And if you're doing a background where you've got lots of these little peepholes showing through different elements of what's in the foreground, like all of these little gaps between the flowers, so I'm pretty much just trying to blend right across it all reasonably evenly so that it doesn't look like it's disjointed in any way, that it convincingly looks like the background continues seamlessly behind what's going on in the foreground. So I'm going to give hands a quick wash, because if I start to pick up any of my lighter colours right now, they're going to get extremely dirty. So now with cleaner hands I can start to bring in some of the lighter colours. So it's almost like all of these circular shapes back here, they're all a little bit transparent, and then they all kind of layer up and they look varying levels of opacity. So that's really the brightest spot in the background where we're getting some lovely light coming through. And each time you do a layer of colour, you're coming back in, blending. And now with a bit of pigment on the paper, you can really control what happens when you blend. You can vary the pressure that you use. So with the side of this blue pastel, I'm just going to add a little mist of colour. So this is how I get some pigment onto the paper without creating a hard edge on anything. And then you'll see when I come back over and start to lightly blend that in, I can really mix that light blue, just like a little film of colour. And you really do need some pigment on the paper before this will start to happen. So I just may not have enough layers of paper here, or layers of pigment here, to blend that smoothly. So you're really just playing about with the layers of colour and getting the paper to the point where you can add more and more subtle little layers. And just your main aim is to leave no hard edges. So everything really soft. So I also want to bring a little bit of extra green down to this bottom corner. We don't have this extra bit of branch coming along behind here, so I can add a bit more green in this corner instead. And then even in other areas you can literally figure paint with soft pastel, or you can use a tool for this as well. You know, if you want to add a very smudgy section of colour without using the stick to add a mark there, you can add pigment in such a variety of ways. That's why I find soft pastel such a great medium to work in. So I think I need a bit more dark colour in here. So yeah, it starts to get to the point then where I'm just judging what else I want from my background. I'll try not to spend too long on this one. So again, I'm using the light blue here. This is BV9. I'll try and remember and shout out some of the colour codes as I'm going, but do refer to the JPEG at the beginning of the tutorial, which shows you all the pastels that I'm using, and also gives you their colour codes, which is not only so that you can get the exact same colour as me, it's more to let you see exactly what colour I'm using, because sometimes the pastels look a bit different on screen, and you don't need to have exactly the same colours as I'm using. You never need exactly the same palette as me, but seeing exactly what colours I'm using does help for you to choose your own palette, to make substitutions for what you've got in your own pastel range. So don't worry if you don't have the same colours. It is not vital. There are many other colours that I have that I could use for this, and it would still work. And you can absolutely do the same. So now that I've got enough pastel on the paper for it to start to be easily manipulated, I can really start to think about the edges of the bird, where I want to have little dark sections contrasting certain parts of the bird. And as the paper starts to fill, because you start to notice that it blends much easier now that there are some layers, then I need to blend much lighter, so I've got a much lighter amount of pressure in order to blend things really smoothly. So if I continue to blend really heavily, then I could just end up with a big muddy mess. So at this stage, be a little bit more careful with your blending. I'm more working on individual little areas now. So again, pastel sticks on their sides for really broad and smooth application. This is grey 3. It's quite a green grey though. I'm really starting to think about how the patches of light continue behind the branches. And then I just start to, with a bit more control now, especially in around the flowers. You can see that I have covered in parts of them and that doesn't matter, but I don't want to saturate them in too much dark pastel, otherwise it will become more difficult later to add the colours of the petals. So each little gap, getting a bit of pigment in there. I can work more on these little gap areas in between the flowers and the stems when I'm actually working on the flowers. But little by little the whole effect starts to soften. And it does take a little while for this because it is a gradual process. But at this stage it's really nice because the colours start to mix together. And you can really then use your fingertips to kind of leave marks, actually create marks with your fingertip and how you drag it through the pigment. You can move the pigment around quite a lot at this stage. So this is a bit of grey 28. Looks very bright going on there. But then once you get it blended in a little, it starts to knock it back. I do want this top corner to provide a bit of bright light. So again, once you start to get a bit of pigment on there, you can start to use your fingertip to shape things better. So it's only the big sticks in the background. You really don't want any hard edges or lines. I've certainly seen people do bokeh backgrounds with pencil, but I think it's a bit more laborious. You're going to get along much quicker if you use the soft pastel sticks only in this type of background. So I've picked up a little bit of BV10 now, and I'm just coming back into these areas trying to add some of the very faint little edges around things. Everything is sort of half transparent here, so I'm really just taking my time now and building up a few little edges peeping out here and there. And with these circular shapes, it's good if you can get them reasonably round. Of course, it's hard to make a circle with a pastel stick, but it's actually a bit easier when you come back in and you're doing your blending. For example, when I do this, that's much easier to make a circle than with the pastel stick. For some reason, it's much easier with just my fingertip. So don't forget, you can manipulate the pastel that you've already put down. You don't need to get it to go on in a perfect circle for these to end up looking like decent circles. So you can also use blenders when you get to this stage just to help with some of the shapes. Again, you don't want to create crisp edges on anything. It's all got to look pretty soft. I'm just trying to capture a sense of the overlapping circles we have up in the top corner here. So I think I'll make a start on the little bird pretty soon. It will be good to see how some of those colours on the bird's head start to pop out from the dark background, and at that stage I can still come back and assess my background a little bit more. So not too many colours used on the background, keeping it reasonably simple, and you'll see some of those colours get repeated pretty soon when I move on to the little bird. So I'm going to move on to the little bird, and the first thing that I'm doing here is just to find the outline of the bird a little bit again. So I'm just putting back in a little bit of the outline from before starting to come in with some colour. So just finding the definite parts of the outline of the beak. Perhaps even run a little bit of that dark line down between the edges of the beak. So as you will see throughout this process, there will definitely be some help from the pastel pencils for sure. With something this scale and where you want to add a nice amount of detail, the pastel pencils are definitely a big help. But let's also start trying to drop in a little bit of colour. So on the beak, for example, I'm going to come in with the dark purple, bits of blue. So we have quite a lot of colour on this little beak. And of course some parts of the beak are quite bright, but we've also got a very dark shadow down in underneath. But I'm using BV10 just to block in a bit of colour first. So you can still make use of the big pastel sticks. Just look at this lovely piece here that has broken recently. I've got such tiny little points and edges. I can aim that little point there right into the beak, and I'm really just taking my time, going slowly on more delicate areas like this where I want a bit of precision where I put the pigment. However, at the same time, it does not have to be perfect when you first put the pigment on, because you can do a lot to shape that pigment into place. So I'm just going to find the upper edge of the little beak. And this part of the beak is really bright. So this is a pink-white pencil from Caran d'Ache. I may well use some pure white in this portrait, but usually I try and hold off on picking up the pure white. I'll usually wait and see if I still think it's necessary a bit later on, or if a different type of tint is actually better for the job. So I'm just filling in most of that upper part of the beak. And you can see why it's important to have colours behind each little edge of the bird, where the colour is going to really help make that section of the bird stand out nicely. So I'm working on the beak first just because it really sticks out into the background, and that's been the case in many of the little bird portraits that I've done recently. That's the part really protruding out to the left, and because it's quite a delicate shape and it's completely surrounded by background colour which needs to contrast nicely, that's why I've tended to start with the beak on most of the bird portraits that I've done. So a little black tip to the end of the beak here, and then it is quite dark down that left side. So just making sure that I've got a clean-ish fingertip, just to give all of that a little pat into the paper. So I may well come back and add a little bit of white on the beak as well. We'll see how bright that looks when I get some more of the bird blocked in, but at least that's some colour pretty well blocked in on the beak. Starting to get a little hint at the way the light is affecting it. So let's get a little bit of the head area blocked in. So again, I'm constantly looking at what the light and shade, what effect is that having on the bird. So if we look just directly underneath the beak here, in here is pretty dark. So the first colour I'm going to bring in here, a little bit of BE6. We've got lovely lighting hitting this little bird. And you can see that the light is really coming from the right side of the bird. So we get a lot of the highlights down this right side of the bird, and then a lot of the shadow areas down the other side. And we'll be talking lots about how to create that shadow effect using your colours, because it pretty much all comes from your colour choices. So I'm just looking for the shape of the top of the chest over here, and I'm using A34, quite similar to the BV15 that I'm also making use of. A lot of these dusky blue colours that are going to look so nice against the pinky orange tones of the Chaffinch bird. I really love the colours of this little bird. So I think there's just this little rim of light running right down the body of the bird. And that's really going to help that side of the bird stand out from the dark background. So I'm adding some of the darker brown in first. Let's try and find this upper edge of the bird's head here as well. Here's another colour of pastel pencil that you're going to see used in this piece quite a lot. These two colours in fact have become two of my favourites in recent times. A light pink white and a very pale lilac colour, and they're both Caran d'Ache. Both extremely nice highlight colours. The warmer of the two, the pink white, tends to get used more in the sunlight, and then this lilac colour, often it's being used as a highlight colour within the shadows, for example, but also just as a cooler highlight colour sometimes. So I'm just going to find the top edge of the little bird's head here. There's kind of a backlighting effect happening around the outer edge of the little bird. And I would even say that this top edge here is more of a blue tone than the light lilac. So I'm just going to show now that I can actually make those little delicate outlines using a soft pastel stick as well. You don't always need the pastel pencil. As long as you can find a little edge on your pastel stick, you can make the tiniest of marks with these big sticks. So let's get a little bit more colour just blocked in. I'm in experimental mode at the moment now, just to figure out what colours I want to use on that, well, that typically Chaffinch colour, which is neither orange or pink. It's a really lovely in-between kind of colour, and that's what I'm going to try and pick up some of for the colour of the Chaffinch. So with this I've got RE15. Again, I'm not coming in with the lightest colour that I can see on the bird yet. I want to build up some of those darker tones. Get some of the contrast and the depth in there first. We've also got a lovely little blue coloured collar on this bird, this lovely grey shape that comes down the back of the head from what I can see. And let's get that area blocked in. Just going to add a little bit of the darker BV15 first. And now the thing about painting little tiny birds like this is to not forget how important the overall shape of the bird is as well. It's very easy to just come along here and make a very simple curved shape for the back of the head, but actually when you really study the little head, there's a lot more shape to it than that. Looking at the particular curve that comes from the beak, and then we have a little sort of a hump here just to the top right of the eye. And then a little bit of a flick out again before that comes down all the way to where it joins the body. So just take extra care on the overall shape of things, because even when it's on a small scale like this, it's really nice to just hint at those extra little details in the shape that show that you've really observed the animal. And it's the same idea down this front part of the chest. Again, very easy to come in here without really studying the photo and make one big long sweeping curve here, when in actual fact what I'm seeing are more like little straight lines that come from here and it turns a corner and goes down. So try and think of it more about the angles that you're seeing. Don't smooth off angles into sweeping smooth shapes. You know, try and look for that slightly angular, those slightly angular parts on the animal to try and capture a bit more realistically. And try not to simplify things like that too much. So let's try a bit of BV9. And then another thing you can also do is to help the shape of things, but from the background. So instead of adding more pigment to the animal, you can shave pigment off. So that's just what I'm doing here, taking a little bit of extra time, really looking at the shape of the outline of the head here, not just presuming that what I see is one sweeping shape for the back of the head, but really looking at the details. So we've also got a little beady eye in here. I'm just going to get that outlined now. Top tip for painting tiny birds is to work to the inside of your lines, and especially on the eyeball. It's so easy for this little circle to grow in size as you're working on it. So just going a little ½ millimeter over your line will make the eye so much bigger. So I'm just very careful to work to the inside of my lines. So let's add a little bit of purple through the browns here. I love mixing purples and browns. I love mixing purple into animals, in fact. It works particularly nice in the shadows. It also works because there's purple in my background, and so we got to remember that light reflects off everything it can reach. So I'll be making a conscious effort to bring lots of those background colours into the little bird as well. So let's try out a bit of lighter peachy colour here. This is Portrait 1 from Unison. Let's try it out. I think this one looks pretty good for some of the lighter parts on the Chaffinch. So there's such a lovely light and shade effect happening on the little bird. We know that down this front part of the bird is quite a warm colour, but because it's so much in the shadows, the overall chest here to me looks quite purple or blue. So it's about trusting what you see with your eyes, even though your brain says, well, that's not actually the colour of the bird. But the actual colour of the thing that you're painting sometimes is completely irrelevant, because what's more important, what gives you more information, is the lighting. So it's what the light is doing to the main subject, rather than what colour you expect to see on this type of bird. So coming back to this far edge here, something I can also do here is just create a little bit more light in the background to help this part of the beak stand out, because they're both quite similar in colour. And I can use the light lilac pencil here. So I don't want to go over the top, just want to lighten that little section right next to the beak, and then I can kind of blend that into the rest of the background there, make it seem less obvious. We've also got some light coming down this side of the bird, so you can see where the dark edge of the bird beats the background. There's a little light edge running in between, and it's like a tiny bit of backlighting that I was talking about. So you get a little aura of light on the other side. And for this I'm using the lilac coloured pencil. If I were to use something very warm over here, it would look a bit strange, because trying to save my warmer colours for over on the side that's actually reaching the sunlight. So just a little bit of cooler reflected light coming down that far side of the bird. But all of those little edges are what really helps the effect in the end. Otherwise your little bird could get lost in amongst the background. So I'm just going to use the very sharp tip that I've got on my white pencil here to try and shape the tip of this beak. Now, I might spend quite a while on a little beak because, as I said, it really sticks out from the bird. It's such a prominent feature of the bird. So just to brighten the very top edge of it there. So I like how the RE15 worked out. I'm going to bring in a different brown earth colour. This is BE28. So I'm mixing different types of colour in throughout the feathers. Even if something is orange toned, for example, it won't all be one shade of that orange tone. You're going to get different bits of variation in the colour depending on a lot of things, depending on the light shade. Perhaps there are some reflected colours coming from somewhere else, so there's always a lot of things to take into account. And I'm just using my fingertips to give everything a slight blend into the paper, especially on these lower layers, just to smooth everything. If I want to create a texture, I can do so in the final few layers, but these first layers I really like to blend those in, make everything nice and smooth for the next layers to go on top. I really start to build the texture more in the later layers. So let's get a little reflective eyeball in here. Again, this is on a tiny scale, so there's only so much I can do for detail in the eye. So what about a bit of reflected light on the eyeball itself? Let's just have another last look at the round overall shape of the eyeball. And of course I'm going to be picking up some blue now for the reflected light on the eyeball. So again, tiny little corner of my pastel stick. The key is to get it close to where you want it and then worry about fine tuning it into place afterwards. Does not have to be perfect on the first pass. What you just need is to get the pigment dropped in there roughly in the right place, and then you can come back in with your black pencil, start to shape it. So I usually don't get it how I want it first time. Normally in and out a few times now, just shaping at the highlight. Yeah, and quite often I make a bit of a mess before I get it how I want it. So I get asked a lot, how do you get details with the soft pastel sticks? And the answer honestly is, well, I don't very well, in fact. But it's what you do with the pigment once it's on the paper. Yes, I've definitely become more accurate over the years at aiming the pigment where I want it, at making precise marks with big sticks. But as you can see, sometimes I'm just putting a blob of pigment as close to the place I want it as possible, and then coming back in and fixing it with the sharp point of a pencil, so you don't have to get absolute precision with your soft pastels. What you're trying to get is that beautiful strength of pigment that you get from the sticks. And you can absolutely play about with this for a while. So you can see I've got to really push and pull at this for a little while. And something that I'll often do, in fact, is to break a piece of pastel. So I've got light 13 here, a very pale lilac colour. And what I'm going to do now actually is just get in the way of the camera a little bit and come to this side of my painting where I can literally watch where the point of the pastel is going to make contact with the paper. So if I am struggling to get what I want, I'll resort to this, just getting on the other side of the painting where I can see more precisely where that pigment is going to land. So yeah, I think I've got too blunt a pencil as well, as you can see here. Got to go and get myself a nice sharp point so that I can finish this eye. So I am shaving a bit off the size of the eyeball because, like I already mentioned, it's very easy to let the overall size of the eye increase as you're working on it. It's such a small area and it's just very easy to gradually add a little bit onto the eye. So at this stage I'm just shaving a little bit off again, and I'm going to pick up some blue pastel pencil as well for the other side of the eye. So blues and nice dusky blue violets are going to be so useful in this piece. I'm going to make so much use of that colour on the bird, around the bird. And it's just a perfect complement for all of the lovely warm pinky orange, I suppose it's kind of peachy colours that you get on a chaffinch. Very pretty little birds. And I took this photo reference quite a few years ago in a forest park in Northern Ireland. And on the same trip I actually took photos of a little robin as well, and I painted it recently too, so I'm really enjoying going back through my photo stash over all the years of taking photos, not getting around to painting the half of them at the time. But it's so nice to revisit these images now and to select a few for painting. I'm really in the mood for painting tiny birds at the minute, and it's something that I actually have quite a few photos of from over the years. Let's just have another go at shaping the reflected light on the eye. And it's definitely a little bit of a delicate process. This eye is absolutely tiny, but you can really test out the versatility of soft pastel with this, because it does let you come back a shocking number of times and go again at the reflection in the eye. You've got quite a lot of give with soft pastel, where you can rework an area without losing all of the tooth on the paper. So really a lot of fiddling on some parts of the bird that I really want to get right, especially around the head. Some of these little areas of outline are so nice. trying to brighten the reflection in the eye a little bit with my white pencil. So you have to just experiment with this a little bit, play about with it. You might do something that looks kind of okay, and then the next mark you make completely ruins it and you've got to start over with the reflection. Just persevere with it until you have something that resembles what you're after. So we are at the end of part 1 now. I hope that you'll join me again in part 2. You'll see the link pop up here on the video.